Germany, but also for our guests and the audience internationally, mainly in the States, to get you a sort of peek preview what you are likely to expect from a next German government. My name is Friederike Thiesenhausen. I'm a member of Atlantik-Brücke's wider board, and I have a day job at Bloomberg, as you can see. With me today to talk about Trump, trade and defense are four distinguished speakers from the German parliament. I start in alphabetical order. We have Jürgen Hardt, who is the foreign policy spokesman of the CDU-CSU conservative group. We have Gude Jensen, deputy chair of the FDP parliamentary group, that is the Liberal Party, free market and socially liberal in outlook. We have Omid Nuripur, also board member of Atlantik-Brücke, who until recently used to be chair of the German Green Party. And last but not least, Niels Schmidt, foreign policy spokesperson of the German SPD, the Social Democrats, the party of current Chancellor Olaf Scholz. So to start us off, I'd like to turn to Jürgen, who was one of the very few Germans in Washington for the inauguration. What did you take away from that day, and what does Trump 2.0 mean for Germany's foreign policy going forward?
Thank you very much, Friederike, for the opportunity to talk about our transatlantic relations after the elections and how it is now. I got an invitation on IDU contacts where CDU and CSU and also the Republican Party of the US is member, and therefore I feel free to take that invitation, because this inauguration of a president, I think it was the 60th inauguration of a US president, is one of the big holidays in US, and to be there, I think it's also not only an honor to the politicians in US, but also to the people of the United States. My impression, the situation in this this inauguration was a little bit different compared to the years, the decades before, because due to the winter temperatures, we were not able to sit on the stairs of the in the west of Capitol, where I would have had a seat, but so I had the chance to see the inauguration via big screens, and there was a chance to do that in the Capitol arena around Capitol Hill for 20,000 or so people. But I got an invitation of the Republican Party of New York, and therefore I was able to join their party in the Capitol Grin on the Pennsylvania Avenue. And it was a good chance to see how Republicans in US feel with this new president. I'm sure that he has the full support, not only from the two houses of the Congress, but also from the party members on the street. I was a little bit wondering about sometimes the wording around. I think there's a huge confrontation or a huge gap between Democrats and Republicans. Also sending messages to the former president and vice president and to the Democrats, which were not, from my point of view, not typical for US. I think to be have a feeling of honor to those who took responsible jobs in the administration was also a tradition in US, but it was a crowding of goodbye, goodbye, goodbye when the helicopter moved with the president and the former president and former vice president. This gave me the feeling that probably in US there's a big gap between the political camps. And the second I saw, and this is what we expected to see, that Trump will be much more and much better prepared for the second term as he was in the first term. And the first term was, the first months of the first term were lost due to the fact that he was not well prepared for taking over in government concerning on the side of personnel, but also on the side of political decisions. I think this is totally different now.
Can I come in there, Jürgen? What do you think Trump means for German foreign policy in your view? I mean, the president is already shooting off executive orders left, right, and center. So there's clearly a lot of preparation. But what does it mean for Germany?
Two big challenges, generally spoken, in foreign security issues and trade issues. And I think he didn't mention the Germany or Europe in his inauguration speech, but he mentioned the automobile industry with always strong statement that shows that he does not know about the fact that the biggest exporter of cars from US to the world is not General Motors and not Ford, it's BMW. So we have to face, I think we will have to face a challenge on that field of automobile. But in trade, generally spoken, in trade, we will we will see, I expect a big confrontation, a big discussion on that. I expect maybe this week or the week after next, after this week, we will see also concrete actions towards Europe. And in foreign and security issues, I'm sure that he asks us for much more to do for the Bundeswehr, Germany also much more to do in European NATO, and all Europe as a whole, much more to do on Ukraine. Maybe not on the military side, because I think that he will stay with a commitment to the military support for Ukraine, but all the other things, financial support for the state structures, civil and economic development of Ukraine, I think there will be a much higher demand on us.
Thank you, thank you. Over to Niels, on the other side of the aisle, so to speak, in the German Bundestag. Do you agree with this assessment, or where do you put your nuances? How do you see German foreign policy having to respond to Trump 2.0?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to be part of this panel. Well, there's a broad consensus on the transatlantic relationship among democratic parties in Germany. I think that, as always in this respect, the Christian Democrats, my dear friend Jürgen, is maybe a little bit too optimistic about Trump and about the possibilities to deal with him. I think that we had a very sober reaction to Trump's election. So the chancellor stated that you have to dance with those who are in the hall. This is, of course, Trump. And he underlined the decades-long partnership and friendship with the US that should last some more decades. But when it comes to trade and tariffs, for example, you can count on Trump to be very aggressive. And I think that the European Union needs to take a unified stance and needs to be prepared for countermeasures and sort of also lay this all out in plain sight in front of the Trump administration, so that they know that there are consequences to this kind of unilateral measures. When it comes to security, I agree with what Jürgen said. I do not see Trump leaving NATO or stuff like that. And we have no signals from the current administration that they just will give up Ukraine. Burden sharing will be on the table again, but that's nothing new. We have known for years that Europe should take on more responsibility, also pay more for defense. So that will be the task for the new federal government here in Germany to solidify and also certify defense planning and defense funding. But I can tell you that we're going to have a rough ride ahead of us. This will be 4 wild years, not only for the transatlantic relationship, but for global politics as a whole, because Trump does not stick to some of the traditional guidelines of American foreign policy. So he's the first and only US president after the Second World War who actively undermines European integration, for example. And I think that should give us some pause and also some incentive to do more for a unified European foreign and security policy.
We will come back to that. Thank you very much, Niels. I'd like to pass this over to Omid. Your party was in charge of foreign policy for the past 3 years in the so-called traffic light coalition. What do you think your foreign policy as the Green Party will have to reflect, and where are the changes for you and the lessons going forward?
Thank you very much for having me. First, the first thing I have to underline is that we are much better prepared than we've been 2017. 2017, everybody was surprised. So I remember the days when our ambassador tried to find a phone number of people he can call within the new administration coming in. This time it's different. A lot of people went around and tried to connect and build ties, and we know whom we are talking to. So this is much better. Second, of course, it's much more complicated with all of these unknowns we have. Always good to have a partner you can predict and you can rely on the next steps. There are a lot of things we just don't know. What's going to be the next steps of the US administration and Ukraine on technology and trade? We don't know, and this is of course getting it much more complicated. Let me just also very briefly just mention the 3 biggest challenges we have in Europe and the 3 answers we have to give. The first, the challenges has just been mentioned by my fellow colleagues, is question of security, and I fully agree with Jürgen Hardt that we have to do much more as Europe. This is a question of spending. This is a question of coming together. It's a question of integration of military skills in Europe also. And of course, it's about Ukraine. Ukraine is not one conflict. This is not conflict in Europe. Ukraine falling means it's going to be a huge war around us and then within our countries. Second, also, this has been mentioned by Niels and Jürgen. I fully agree that the second challenge is a question of tariffs and then trade. And the third one is technology. It's definitely crucial to see how the American side gonna will with that issue. And of course, the worst case for Europe is there is technology battles between China and US, and it's about us just being part of that as part of the American phalanx. Mm-hmm. This won't happen, and this is about our sovereignty to have our own stakes there, and we've been not good enough. The 3 answers is first, I just can repeat what has been told before. It's about Europe. We have to come together and find common solutions, and there is a huge awareness for that in Europe. Second, of course, this is not a country far away. This is the United States. It's the best partner we always had, and we will always have in the world out of Europe. And the friendship between the nations is not about who's sitting in the Oval Office or the Chancellor in Berlin. It's about friendship of our societies and our people. And this is what we have to keep our mind and live. So always being ready to cooperate. The third, very last one is, of course, we need a global strategy. It's not about, going and taking the side of China. China is a rogue state when it comes to the values and when it comes to systemic rivalry. But of course, we have to cooperate with all of the other countries all across the globe, especially in the fields which are not that easy to cooperate with the United States new administration.
Okay, thank you very much. I hear a lot of agreement on Europe being important. The topics are clearly also, there is no disagreement there. Before we dive more deeply into the issue of trade and how to keep Europe together on this, I'd like to give Güde a chance to outline what a liberal foreign policy for Germany would look like. I mean, your party has actually, I looked this up, had the foreign department for the most number of years in the post-war history, so there's a proud tradition there. Where do you put the emphasis on a liberal foreign policy for Germany?
Yes, thank you also from my side. Thanks for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to have a little sneak peek towards the German perspective vis-a-vis the US one, and the changes in the Oval Office. I would maybe add that even in the current government, we for quite some time, for 3 years, up until sadly the coalition of the traffic light coalition broke. We had the transatlantic coordinator, which is a liberal, which is Michael Link. So we still also encourage the ties between the US and the German government, not only in Washington, D.C., but also in the states, in the whole country. I might only add a few things, because I very much agree with Omid, who said that it is not only about bringing policies and politicians together, but rather lead by example towards the very strong ties that our societies have. There is a pond between us, but we are democracies, and we kind of breathe the same air in the world, and also on a stage where we need to negotiate also with non-democracies. So I think that is a very important point also when it comes to facing certain bridges, certain aisles that where a divide is more visual at in these times, not only in Washington but also in Berlin. Regarding last week, regarding the campaigning, and I would add that I would hope that also the German next government is not just, there's a German saying, nicht wie das Kaninchen vor der Schlange sitzen. So if I might translate that, not being the rabbit staring into the snake's eyes. Maybe there's a pendant
I think it's
towards...
It's the rabbit in the headlights, I think, in the headlights of the
car.
car.
I didn't know that. So there's a similar one. So I would wish for Germany and also Europe to be self-confident, because it is about conflicts and prospects in these years and months, fighting for our freedom. Not only Ukraine is doing that, but we also need to step up. And I think we should be self-confident when we face negotiations with the Trump administration. I think there is no need for being timid, but rather focus on our trade and export-driven economy. And I think that is a very good circumstance to lead the talks, or to actually fly over to the United States and have these talks. And I think this is very much overdue whenever we have a new set of parliamentarians in the next German Bundestag.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's dive a bit more deeply into the topic of trade. And I'd like to pick up on something you said, Niels, and it's also very poignant that you are sitting there in front of Notre Dame, a church in Paris. Famously, you said Europe needs to be stronger. If I play this back to you, I mean, Germany was not exactly able to lead and synthesize a common position in the EU in recent years, for example, on tariffs for Chinese electric cars, just one example. What would you do differently in the future to really make it happen that Europe speaks with a united voice?
Well, when it comes to these Chinese EVs, you have to admit that the way the EU Commission devised the special tariffs was really ill-advised, because they punished European re-importers more than others. So it was more about the design than about the idea. And I think that over the last 8 years, the European Union has developed new tools of countering trade punitive measures, such as the counter exertion mechanism. And so I think what we need to do is to stand up against these ill-fated ideas coming out of the Trump team about tariffs being trade. And so we need to show a very big stick. At the same time, we should offer carrots. I don't see much enthusiasm for new free trade agreements in the US Congress, I must say. But at least on some areas, and especially when it comes to countering growing Chinese influence in world trade, we should offer opportunities of cooperation to the new administration in Washington. And I think we've come to a point where we need to explain to our American friends that if they want to take on China, they need allies. In East Asia, countries like South Korea and Japan and others, but also in Europe. So better to have allies on your side and not antagonizing them by introducing special tariffs. So they should weigh the options and also weigh the benefits of cooperating with us instead of throwing this kind of stuff on our heads. So we should not give up trying to explain the rationale of cooperation on trade and also on technology policy when it comes to China. And this interest should prevail over these very narrow-minded ideas on imposing special tariffs on, I don't know, EU cars and others.
Mm-hmm. Can I take this up because the CDU-CSU election program explicitly actually mentions that you want to push for a new transatlantic trade agreement, Jürgen. I didn't find that in the other election programs, but people might say, given everything that comes out of Washington at the moment, that seems a tad naive, but help us. Where, in very simple terms, in what areas, what goods and services do you see scope for a new TTIP?
You are right that we should not have the illusion that in the next 4 years, with the majority in Congress and with this president, we can negotiate a new TTIP as it was planned as a big project, including nearly all sectors of economy. But punctually, probably it's possible to work together, maybe also together with the concept of becoming more independent from Asian markets in special technologies, semiconductors, and so on. But I think the biggest challenge with the trade policy of US President Trump is that he is promoting a way of trade politics which is harming US more than others. There's a big misunderstanding in national economics, and I think also with Donald Trump, that the negative trade balance of US is a result of a weakness of the US economy. I think it's the result of the fact that US is much richer than the rest of the world, and therefore US citizens has not to do all the work they need to keep their level of welfare. And on the other hand, due to the fact that the US dollar is the world currency, they are able to compensate that. Therefore, every tariff increased by Donald Trump is first and mostly paid by citizens of the United States or companies in the United States. On the other hand, we are also will also harmed by that. Therefore, we need to have an intense dialogue with our colleagues in the Congress and in the new government to make clear that a lot of negative effects from that politics are going directly into the heart of US. And the imperative I think Donald Trump has two imperatives. The first imperative is growth, fighting against inflation. This is a contradiction to tariffs. And the second is China. And I think to go to US President Trump from European side and tell him that we also have some concerns with the trade policy of China and with the political development in China, and therefore asking for a common approach on China, which is not overwhelming China, but limiting China's negative impact on trade, international trade, for example, to have a bigger leverage towards China. China needs good export relations, because otherwise the Chinese Communist Party cannot fulfill its proposal of welfare for all people. And therefore we have a leverage to convince them, but we should do that together. And I fear that we missed that opportunity to talk with the Biden administration about the common approach on China. And I hope we will do that. And just one last sentence. We have a new government in Germany. I expect maybe around Easter, second half of April. In June, we have the European Union summit. We have NATO summit, probably with Donald Trump in The Hague or the Netherlands. And we have in June the big G7 summit, I think, in Canada. For all three events, the new chancellor, whoever will be chancellor, has to bring a strong position of Germany on the table in a phase where we don't have a budget for 25. For example, in defense, but also in other fields, we are not able to give the proof from the parliament that what the chancellor is promoting will be also fulfilled on the budget side. And therefore, we have a big challenge to make sure that in this 6 weeks between new government and these summits, we also have a common approach of the Deutsche Bundestag to back up the chancellor, whoever he will be. It will be to make sure that Germany will not be ignored on that debates and not ignored by US President Trump.
Okay, thank you very much. So I take from that a comprehensive trade agreement is indeed unlikely. Cooperation in certain areas, often energy, LNG is mentioned.
But the way to it helps.
Yeah, no, true. You start with small steps, and maybe in the future you can think in TTIP dimensions once again. But the issue of China is, of course, an important one. The US has asked of Europe for a while, not just under this administration, to pivot away from dependence on China. And Germany, of all the European countries, is particularly strongly exposed to exports to China and demand from China for machinery and so on. The German business lobby groups have often said that, you know, this is too important a market to give up. Question for Gude in particular, because of the ties of your party to this particular constituency in Germany. How should the next German government walk this thin line between de-risking and not depriving German businesses? We're not doing that well if you think of 2 years, successive years of economic decline of those vital export markets.
Thank you, Friederike. I would have also said it's a very thin line, especially for Germany, maybe more a thin line than for other European countries. Still, I think if Germany wants to take a strong stance vis-a-vis China, also with regard to the US, we should try to be more one-voiced from a European perspective. And I think that's something, and I would have mentioned it with regard to the background of Niels Schmidt and the Notre Dame chapel. I think it would help if Europe could agree more on one direction vis-a-vis China. And I think that is something nobody else can help us with. I think that is something we need to talk with our allies and our European friends in Brussels and Strasbourg. As we are export driven, and I think the Chinese market will never be or will always be important, still I think we should focus more on diversifying also within other Asian countries. That has not been the case for several years, and I think on the one hand side, it's a domestic topic for us of having this one voice approach vis-a-vis Europe towards China. And on the other hand, we still need German companies, European companies still need the Chinese market. But diversification, I think, would help also towards restraining China's influence in our European partner countries and in the world.
Let's move on to defense and NATO. Germany has in recent years finally reached the 2% goal of spending for defense matters of GDP. To what extent can and should Germany increase its defense spending further? Trump says now 5%. I'd like to play this one to Omid. Wouldn't it be honest to say to the population in Germany that security has a price tag and we've just had it very good in recent years, but now we have to prioritize security over social spending? Wouldn't that be the honest thing to do in this election campaign?
I think that this is not about playing these two issues. It's about more security, and more security needs more investment in that. We have a huge lack of investments for the last decades in the German armed forces, and it's about more than 2%. We have to spend if we want to modernize them enough and in a sufficient way, and if we want to have armed forces which is not only part of NATO and EU and part of our alliances, but which can carry a substantial part of the burden. This is why we are talking about 3.5. My party is talking about 3.5, but at the end of the day, it's not about figures; it's about what is needed. The war, I just can't repeat it. The war in Ukraine is not one conflict; it's the conflict. And if Ukraine is losing this war, it's going to lead to the next conflict and to the next war in Europe. And this is why every single penny we are spending in these days for defense is preventing the next war. We have to get back our strong armed forces, not because of the American administration, not because they are demanding, but because we need these strong armed forces to prevent the next war, and also to fulfill our obligations we have within NATO. There are a lot of things we could talk about, which lacks there are in the armed forces when it comes to equipment and personnel. I don't think it's the issue here. But no, it's not about the American president coming up and saying and reminding us that we have to spend no matter who's in the Oval Office.
And if I confront Jürgen with that, do you feel there's enough honesty about this trade-off ultimately between, the public purse is limited. If you spend for security, you don't have the money for other policy areas. Do you think there's enough honesty about this in the German election campaign?
All the budget problems we have are mainly caused due to the fact that we have this weak economy in Germany. A better performance of economy would lead first to also more income on the state side. The second is that we as CDU-CSU plan to take some things out of the budget, of the federal budget. For example, special investment in infrastructure in Germany maybe can be financed out of the budget in other structures. This is where we should discuss among democratic parties in Germany to do it more modern and more on as it is, for example, for business companies. Therefore, the question of money is, for me, it's not the most urgent. Because even if we increase our defense expenditure significantly, it will not be done tomorrow. It will be done on a path towards no new capabilities of the Deutsche Bundeswehr, and this will take some years. I see Omid talking about 3.5, which was the level of defense expenditures in the Cold War times. I think I was in UK, the Social Democratic government there will put minimum 2.5 into their strategic outlook. I think will be presented in March or so. Therefore, with 2%, the traditional German 2%, we are far behind the expectations of the others. But beside the money question, I also think Germany, and this is a proposal of mine, probably for the June summit of NATO, that Germany is also doing more on the qualitative side. As we do, it is new for Germany to station soldiers, German troops, in other European Union in other European NATO member states. as Brits, France, Belgians, and UK and US did in the past. We do it now also in Lithuania, which is a huge step for the Deutsche Bundeswehr. But if a NATO strategy in Europe come to the result that German Air Force or German tanks are better located in another of the European NATO states than instead of in the western part of the Lüneburger Heide, then I think Germany should be open and to put a commitment on more money for defense, but also a commitment on more qualitative development of the Deutsche Bundeswehr as the main pillar of NATO in Europe. I think this should be an offer that also might impress Trump and Republicans in Washington. But this needs to be well prepared.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to give Niels the chance to comment on this, again with his European backdrop there. Your party talks about strengthening the European pillar in NATO. What, in concrete steps, is the single most effective step Germany can take there? Would it be abolishing national procurement and just procuring on the European level? How do you really, fast track this strengthening of the European pillar in NATO?
First of all, let me say that I emphatically disagree with my two colleagues. We need an honest debate about how to finance bigger spending on defense. This has been a blind spot for many years, and there are only three ways you can increase spending for our armed forces. One is to raise taxes. Second is to cut other expenditures. And third is to raise the public deficit. And most probably we will need all of the three. But I think that with the current debt brake in place, we will not be able to fulfill the obligations of a decent state for our citizens, be it external or domestic security, be it social security, be it infrastructure spending. So we need to fix this either on the national level by reforming the debt brake, our constitutional balanced budget rule, or we need to flexibilize European rules on public debt, the so-called Maastricht rules or Stability Pact rules. And this needs to be implemented as soon as possible, because we are now in a situation where we urgently need to do more for defense. We should also streamline spending of European governments, first of all, by harmonizing technical standards and reducing the diversity of weapons programs run by European governments. But also, secondly, by investing into common projects. And this is also some news for our American friends. We will buy more European in the future. Otherwise, we cannot develop a strong European defense industry. For a transitional period, of course, we will need to purchase modern weaponry from our American friends, as the German government under Chancellor Scholz did by acquiring F-35 fighter planes for nuclear sharing, and as we will do for European air defense. But in the longer-term perspective, this will be very much about procuring European weapon systems from European producers.
Thank you for that. Before I give Guido and Jürgen maybe the chance to comment on the debt brake question, because I know that that is something that lots of people are watching, I wanted to remind everyone that there is the chance to submit a question in the Q&A function on the bottom of the Zoom window, and in the last few minutes or last 10 minutes or so of this webinar, we will have the chance to go through your questions, so please fire away. But coming back on financing defense spending, because that is indeed a sort of elephant in the room. Jürgen and Guido, don't you think, given the changed the changed geopolitical circumstances, there is a case for doing all those three things that Niels has mentioned?
Who should start?
You please, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. First to the debt brake. A discussion on debt brake might be misunderstood in other European Union, especially in Eurozone member states. I fear that in case that Germany is losing its restrictions on debt, others will follow us. We, Germany, would be able to we are strong enough to go over this regulation for some years, for example, for urgent measures in defense, but others will take it as a bad example or as a good example from their point of view. And I fear that we will have a euro crisis, second euro crisis on the horizon if Germany is losing its strong measures. But on the other hand, and I already mentioned that we have this 100 billion extra budget agreed on in the Deutsche Bundestag by changing the constitution. It was among the 4 democratic parties decided on, also with the votes of CDU-CSU, without harming the debt brake. We have the concept, the idea of taking out some expenditures for civil infrastructure in Germany into other ways of financing without losing, giving off the debt brake in the constitution. And the fourth thing, and Niels probably will agree, if we have a better economic development in Germany, and hopefully the new government will be successful with that, we also have this surplus on state income without increasing taxes. Then we have more tax income, but not due to increasing taxes, but due to better economy. And I think the first step should be looking to the capabilities of the Bundeswehr we need on a time frame, in which year what should be the capabilities of the Deutsche Bundeswehr for the NATO and for our defense in Germany and for Germany. And on second, what does it cost? And at third, thinking about how to finance. And I think this way of discussing that topic should be is better than to discuss about 3.5 or only 2 or 2.5 or 5% of GDP.
Okay.
If we spend more for defense and it's only an inflation in costs for military equipment, there's nothing won for more security. Huh?
No, true. But I mean, as another euro crisis is probably at the extreme end of, the potential danger of Germany taking on more borrowing. Germany has the lowest borrowing in the G7, so that doesn't exactly lead to the next euro crisis straight away tomorrow. But I think we leave this one here. We have a lot of agreement on the need to increase defense spending. There is disagreement on the exact means, but again, agreement on strengthening euro measures. Let's quickly, before we come to the questions from the audience, turn to 2 geographic regions. I wanted to touch.
I think Guido wants to say something. Or?
Oh, sorry, Guido.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a very small thing, but is for well, the debt brake is rather domestic issue for us in the German Bundestag, but I think it's an interesting one, at least also for our American friends, because spending on defense, or our defense spending on a level in the German Bundestag budget hearings, is not the item where we should question whether we could prioritize something, because defense spending is the responsibility of the German Federal Republic, whereas we have certain other budgets that have been growing and growing for years now, which are not the direct responsibility of the federal level, but rather on a state or municipal level. And if we could agree, if the next German Bundestag and also the states could agree on talks that are very honest regarding whose responsibility are we talking about, and I would exclude defense spending from that. There should be enough money in our budget currently, even within the debt brake, for us to ensure a quality of procurement, of capacity building, and also in a very timely frame that is very much needed. So I think we we should not discuss so much about numbers regarding numbers, whether it be it now 2% or 3.5%, but rather having a strong economy can also, or lets us focus on better defense spending. And so I wouldn't focus on the sheer numbers, but rather on the quality of the spending.
Understood. Thank you so much. I'm aware of the time, and I'd like to touch on two geographical regions. One is Ukraine, quite obvious, and the other is the Arctic. And so I wanted to ask Omid, negotiations have not started officially, but there's clearly backroom channel exploration going on about a possible deal in Ukraine. What do you see as Germany's contribution to bringing about and possibly maintaining a peace in Ukraine?
Just two single sentences to the issue before. I'm very happy that among the federal prime ministers of this country, there are 7 from the CDU, which is the party of Jürgen, who are definitely pro reform. I think the question of Ukraine, the core of the conflict is about the right of self-determination of the Ukrainian people. If the Ukrainian people at the end tell us that they want to come to the table of negotiations and they are ready to freeze this line or that line of the front, and they are ready to not give up, but understand that for the next couple of years, maybe they will not achieve the entire recovery of their territorial sovereignty, that might be. And this is what we have to respect. But this is not about Washington, Moscow, Brussels, Berlin, or whomever to tell the Ukrainian people what the solution for their country is. And if we do not understand this as a core of the conflict, we all are gonna lose, and Moscow gonna win. So this is why we support Ukraine, and yeah, there are a lot of back channel talks in these days, and I'm very happy that the timeline of the new U.S. administration is not 24 hours of a solution, but 6 months or more. So we are ready to talk. This is not about Germany alone. It's about all of the countries in Europe, especially our partners, our closest partners in Eastern and Middle Europe, in Central Europe, in Poland, in the Baltics, are waiting for any initiative which is bringing us together and make us even more united to stand against the Russian aggression. And we have to understand that the entire calculation of Putin was Europe going to be divided when he starts his full-scale escalation in Ukraine, and it was not. We are united, and we're going to stay united in that.
Thank you. If there's no one else who wants to chime in, I hear a hesitation to take a position and a preference to let the Ukrainian decide for themselves, which is perfectly acceptable. I'd like to turn to the Arctic, actually, a geographic region we haven't heard much about previously, or maybe in some specialist circles, but obviously since the floated idea that Trump would like to buy Greenland, it's very much on the agenda again. But does Germany actually have an Arctic policy? Does it need one? What is the German-European interest in this region now that the ice around the North Pole is melting and shipping routes and, of course, routes for military vessels are opening up? And I'd like to put this one to Niels, please.
Certainly, we do have an interest and a strategic interest in the future of the Arctic, and that's why there is a German Arctic strategy. That's why Germany participates in these dialogues around the future of the Arctic, and I think it's also a very welcome sign very broadly speaking, that there is a heightened interest from the US in the Arctic and in Greenland. But this should not lead us to talk about annexation and takeover of Greenland. I think that we have a very strong position, especially when it comes to Greenland, as Europeans and Americans, because this is all NATO area, and we should respect that. And I think so. We should not talk about these sort of disruptive measures, but rather stay united, North Americans and Europeans, on that matter, and try to fend off, let's say, opponents, be China or Russia, from interfering in these areas. And what I sense is a terrible drop in American soft power in the last 2 weeks since Trump took over. And you may only count on hard power in some Washington circles, but I would presume that soft power is still part of foreign policy, and the Trump team should not underestimate the value of soft power. And that's why it was so disturbing to see these very harsh remarks coming out of Washington and of Trump's mouth personally.
Okay. Just as an aside, Gude unfortunately has to leave us. So we say thank you for your contribution. Thank you for joining us, and hope to see you again at another webinar one day. I'd like to synthesize a couple of questions that have come in on the chat function about the potential for positive collaboration with the US. And one of our audience members, Justin, phrases it that Trump appears poised to make disruptions, very keen on this sort of Silicon Valley style of disrupting something. What are areas, and he asked that to the panel, what are areas where you see the US and Germany and Europe being able to positively disrupt something together? Jürgen, is there scope for positive disruption?
First, I will not give up my hope, my expectation that in foreign security issues, there will be a closer cooperation between Germany, especially Germany and US, and Europe and US, especially the NATO European Union members that are also NATO members. The unity we show after the first days from the Russian aggression against Ukraine, the war against Ukraine, is encouraging. And I think Donald Trump will not give up the chance to keep the #1 in NATO, to have to be the de facto head of the biggest military power in the world, and therefore I'm not afraid that if we do not mistakes, and if there are goodwill on US, and by the way, in Congress there's a lot of goodwill on that. I talked to the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Senate in November. They are totally committed to NATO and our alliance. Therefore, I think this will be a big field of cooperation. It will remain a big field of cooperation, and probably at the end we can say we came forward in those 4 years under Trump. The second field is, I think, technology, to make sure that not only China, some special modern technologies are not occupied and monopolized by China, and probably allies of China, but that we have a diversification, that we have maybe are much stronger if we match capabilities of Europe and North America. Maybe not building a new monopoly, but to have 2 big pillars of development that are in a competition, and therefore better than all the others around. This is what I expect, and we have this technology cooperation with US, and I think this is a field where we can do much more, and we should do much more. And the third is that we should increase our civil society contacts. This is a little bit out of sign in the current situation, and it was under Trump, in Trump 1. I think we should increase ties between US and Europe. And by the way, the Atlantik-Brücke is one of the big pillars of that. And this will help us to mutual understanding.
Friederike, I'm sorry, my next panel is physically starting in 1 minute. If I may just say 2 sentences and just thank you for having me and for the discussion. Just one hard disagreement with what Jürgen said. One United States soldier at Greenland is the end of NATO. And it would be encouraging Russia to invade Baltics. This would be a super nightmare for anybody. And this is what the American administration has to understand. The consequences would be huge, and this would be their responsibility. I'm sorry, I have to run.
I think it will not happen.
Okay.
I hope it will not happen. If it happens, I agree with Omid.
There is already a base, but maybe we have time for one last question, and that would be to Niels, if I may. It's a question from the audience again, and it's about Europe. Which countries do you think will lead this coming together of a European foreign policy? Germany clearly is asked to lead here, and who are the natural allies? I mean, we have been talking about this for decades, to be honest, European foreign policy, and it's not really come off the ground very much. Where do you see the other allies?
Well, within the European Union, it certainly will be the Weimar Triangle. And we had to wait for a very right-wing government in Poland to be vanquished by a more moderate government to revitalize the Weimar Triangle. And I think now is the time, after the German elections, to do the job. And I think that would be a very, very good outfit for this initiative. And talking about Europe, we should not forget about Great Britain. I believe that when it comes to foreign and security policy, as we've seen over the last 3 years in Ukraine, the contribution of the United Kingdom can be crucial, and we should consider more and deeper, closer and deeper ties between the European Union and Great Britain in the future.
Great.
I totally agree.
Great, thank you. On this note, I think we have a minute to go until the end of the hour. What do we take away from this? There's a lot of agreement between the 4 parties in the Democratic Center in Germany on foreign policy. There is some disagreement on how to finance things, but the broad direction seems fairly uncontentious. We have now roughly 19 days to go until the elections take place. So watch this space. Atlantik-Brücke keeps putting on these seminars. This is not the first, and it won't be the last, where we bring together policymakers and influential voices from across the pond, both from Germany and the United States, to help us understand each other better. And we're looking forward to the next webinar. Thank you to my panelists, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in. And see you again. Thank you.
Goodbye and thank you.
Bye.